Hello everyone, in today's video we're going to be finishing up our series on the Mooney 201/M20J here, and we're going to take a look at some quirks, oddities, as well as emergency procedures. Now, hopefully you never really have to do any of these emergencies, because unfortunately some of these are pretty dangerous and pretty difficult to get out of, but there are procedures for them. And the other thing you want to think about too is, are you going to be prepared in the event that they do come up, which is why we're making this video. So let's go ahead and get started. So first things first, we're going to deal with a pretty standard emergency here. We're going to have an engine power loss during our takeoff run. Now, one of the great things about X-Plane over here is we can actually create engine failures on the fly. We can actually create quite a few different engine failures on the fly. We can do things like the throttle shuts off, we can shut off the fuel pump, cause all sorts of really fun problems. Like in this case, I'll break the drive shaft. Seize engine, ooh, I like that. So I'm going to go ahead and make it so that it fails as soon as I press Control F here. And like I said, it's kind of a fun little trick. So let's go ahead and get all ready for takeoff here. Everything's already been done. I've kind of gotten everything nice and sorted out. We'll go ahead and get our flaps to the correct position. We'll go ahead and engage full power here. Our full pump is already on, so I'm not going to worry about that too much. And we're going to get rolling. Just kind of enjoying. Everything's looking pretty good. Picking up speed. Got my 30 knots or so. Everything's fine, and the engine just failed. All right, so we're going to apply maximum braking. We're immediately going to come down here. We're going to shut the fuel selector to the off position, which in my opinion seems to be a little dangerous to do it. We're also going to make sure our starter is set to the off position. That is a lot of things to try to do while flying and reading at the same time. But in this case, no problem. We were able to stop the plane and get it under control. We were able to engage all the correct settings. I didn't even get enough time to pull the throttle back on this one, but you can see how fast of a set of motions that you're going to have to go through during that time. So this is a little different than a similar emergency. All right, now we got a much scarier situation, and one we've already gotten airborne. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use a standard, proper, normal takeoff technique here. I'm not going to do anything too sophisticated here. Well, it looks like somebody hit the radio master switch when I wasn't looking. You got to avoid letting other people inside your planes. They tend to cause trouble. All right, we're rolling down the runway here, getting about 40 knots. Got a little bit of a crosswind today, nothing too excessive. There's 50, 60. We're going to start giving the nose a tug upwards, and up we go. Go ahead and leave the gear down until we're clear of any obstacles. Alright, everything's going pretty smoothly so far. Nothing to complain about. Just climbing up, doing about our 70 knots. And nothing too serious here. Things are looking pretty good, just kind of climbing. Everything seems perfectly fine, it's just a normal hot summer and the engine shut down. So what I'm going to do this time is I'm going to pause. So we have a little bit of time to think about this when we go down. So my engine just completely seized. You probably heard that little vroom as it started to die. So there's a couple different things the book is going to ask us to do. The first thing it's going to want us to do is immediately get on the right glide speed. In this particular case, we're doing 71 knots already. Super. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to make sure the electric fuel pump is in the on position, which it is in the on position. Next, we're going to confirm that the mixture is set all the way to full rich in this particular case. We're going to make sure the magneto and start switch is set to the both position. We're going to make sure our propeller control is all the way at high RPM, which is what it is. We're also going to make sure our throttle is full forward. Now, the interesting thing here is we're going to switch fuel selectors. So we were on the right. I'm going to go ahead and select the left tank, and let's see if things improve for us. So go ahead and unpause here. Nope, they did not improve. So I'm going to go ahead and get ready for an emergency landing. I'll go ahead and pause again. Now, there's a couple different types of emergency landings that the book talks about here. You have the power off, where you have gear retracted or extended. That's us. And you also have the power on with gear retracted. Each one of those is slightly different depending on the scenario. Obviously, if we have like a gear failure, you're going to be looking at probably the power on with gear retracted. If you have a power off like we have in this case, we're going to deal with it. So what do we need to do? Now, the first thing we need to do is we need to make sure the ELT is armed, which you should have done already. We're going to make sure everybody is all nice and tightened and ready to go. Safety belts are set. We're going to unlatch this. I'm actually not going to unlatch this because it's going to open up and it's going to cause the airplane to finger quotes crash. So don't worry about that. But what we are going to do is we're going to take the mixture control and we're going to pull it all the way to the idle position. We're going to take the fuel selector valve. We're going to set it down here, which is going to be in the off position. We're also going to take our magneto and starter switch. We're going to set that to the off position. And then we're going to take our wing flaps and we're going to slap them all the way down. Now, I won't be able to put these down until I re-unpause here. And then as soon as the flaps are down, we're going to go ahead and kill the master switch. And then we're going to try to execute a landing, which I promise you will probably end up in the Connecticut River. So let's go ahead and kill the pause here. Keep that nose down. Whoa. It's going to be partial. And we're going to go ahead and kill that master switch here. And we're going to go between these trees. Looks pretty good. I have no time to get the landing gear up, so it's going to be really splooshy. We're just going to go ahead and sink ourselves right into the Connecticut River. If you wanted to, oh, that would be the flip. All right, so in that particular case, it would have been nice to get the landing gear up, but you saw by the time they would have retracted, they would have been in some kind of position between the two. So again, you want to be ready for that at any time. So let's go ahead and take a look at a different emergency. All right, slightly different sort of emergency. So I'm sitting here on the ground. I'm just about ready to do a little more run up, and I'm just giving it just a little bit of power here. And something isn't right. See if you can spot it. Yes, exactly. You'll probably notice that we're discharging a pretty good solid 40 amps here, and probably that's not a good thing. So we're dealing with something wrong with the alternator. Normally, of course, when you do this, you will also be getting a little warning light that's going to be notifying you. It'll be a voltage warning light illuminated. It'll give you a heads up to say, hey, there's something wrong with this one. Unfortunately, our version of this aircraft here does not have that feature, so our only warning that something's wrong with the alternator is the fact to push the throttles forward, and we are still showing a very, very strong discharging. In this case, what we'd want to do is we want to go ahead and disengage the radio master switch. Next, what we want to do is we want to shut off the master switch. Don't worry, it won't shut off. As soon as we do that, we're going to go ahead and see if the light's still on. In this case, we don't have the light, but like I said, there's nothing we can really do much about it. So now what we do is we go to the alternator circuit breaker, which unfortunately I can't pull out here. You're going to pull that out, turn off all non-essential electric equipment, and you're going to land as soon as possible. Now keep in mind, this is going to be a little bit different than if we had ourselves a alternator low voltage versus a straight up alternator failure. In this case, what we do is we come to the circuit breaker, pull it out, see if everything shuts all your stuff off, then reset it once, see if it gets better. If the warning light flashes, which means you still have that low voltage, pull this sucker off, shut off non-essential equipment, and you're going to have to land the plane right away. So now what we'll do is we'll take a look at a slightly different kind of emergency. All right, everything looks good. I've set the plane up. I've gotten all my settings good. We're going to go ahead and give ourselves full throttle, start ripping down this runway. Then we're going to get ready for a nice conventional takeoff. Everything seems to be going fine. Yeah, got that nice Lycoming engine sitting up front. Man, that thing sounds healthy as ever. All right, start lightening up the nose a bit here. And we're just going to come nice and smoothly. A little bit of crab there. Go ahead and we'll leave the landing gear in the down position because we're not clear of obstacles. My hand basically twitches there every single time because I think of the airliners, we pretty much got to get them away right away. So we're climbing, everything's fine, everything's perfectly normal. We're just about to clear some nasty obstacles under us. I'm actually going to start milking those flaps up just a little bit here because why not? Everything's looking good. We'll start accelerating to speed. I'm going to go ahead and slap the landing gear lever hander up, and we're just going to wait patiently for those lovely landing gear to start coming up. Now, one of the neat things you have on this plane is there's actually a little window here in the floor, kind of difficult to see, that little green. And what that will do is that will tell you whether or not you can see the actual nose wheel, so you'll be able to identify what's going on here. So I put the landing gear handle up, and I noticed something. Uh-oh. I'm getting a warning saying that the gear are unsafe. Yeah, the gear's unsafe. And by the way, only part of the gear is unsafe. So you can see in this particular case that unfortunately our aircraft has a landing gear problem. We've asked it to go ahead and slap those gear up, and unfortunately they didn't go all up together. Now your initial instinct's like, oh, I must not hit the actuator right. So you put it down again, you give it a couple moments to go ahead and kind of unfold everybody. Obviously keep in mind you can't go faster than 106 with this landing gear down. So you go ahead and cycle it up again, and bad news. The front wheel comes in, the left wheel comes in, but that right wheel is it's just not doing it today. So now we have a problem. We know that the landing gear are unsafe. We know the landing gear are unsafe because we put them in the up position, we've waited the requisite amount of time, we've checked the little window right here, and we still have the landing gear unsafe situation like this. Now this is kind of an interesting situation because we might be in a position where we can put our gear down and then come back in for a landing, which would be the recommended thing to do. So let's go ahead and try that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and put the landing gear back down. Use power a little bit, we don't need to be ripping around here, and we're going to see whether or not we can get that light to go out. Let's see our gear down, gear unsafe. I'm just taking a look at it. We're still gear down. Now notice I've got both warning lights at the same time here. I've got one saying the gear's down, the other one saying the gear's unsafe. That simply means there's something wrong with the gear. So what do? Do we trust the gear down? Do we trust the gear unsafe? Most likely in this particular situation, you're not going to be able to actually see which landing gear is being your troublemaker unless there's some sort of acoustic hint, or maybe you're getting a little bit of drag. Obviously, if you put all the landing gear up and the plane starts pulling to the right like that, that's probably the universal sign that it's probably the right landing gear that's still down. That means when you do go ahead and execute your emergency landing, you have to assume that that landing gear probably will not hold the weight of the plane. There's a chance that it will, but most likely it won't. So you want to go ahead and make sure you're landing very, 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 very soft and gently basically on the left and right side, and then the world's most gentle weight transfer onto it while keeping your aileron deflected away from the dead landing gear. Obviously, if this is the nose, this is a slightly different problem as well, because then you run into a situation where if you do go ahead and land the aircraft, there's a good chance that the nose gear will fail, and all of a sudden it goes punk like that, and you end up digging a very, very strange shaped ditch, basically, in the runway itself. So when it comes to the landing gear not coming up, the way we usually do that is you have this little warning over here that says push safety bypass. So what you're going to do in this particular case, when you're dealing with this particular one, is you can basically press that button as a way to say, hey, ignore all this, and then you can go ahead and set it. Now that's only going to work for you in a situation where the landing gear themselves, maybe there's something electrically getting a little funky with that one. There's probably a reason why I decided not to do it. So you're going to press this button and you're going to wait for the gear lights to go out. In this case, they didn't, but after they did, assuming they did, there's a little circuit breaker over here called gear taunt. You pull that sucker out and it's going to shut off the warning horn, and then you can go ahead and reset this by pressing that again, push the circuit breaker back in, set the gear switch back, and then obviously check the airspeed safety switch to see if there's something related to why that occurred. But obviously, like I said, if we have that one gear wheel dragon, we're probably going to have to be approaching it a little bit differently. Alright, speaking of landing gear, there's a different problem, in my opinion. This one might even be more scary than the previous one. So we are in our downwind leg. There's a lovely Hartford sitting there waiting for us. That's the beep, beep, beep to let us know that it's time to go ahead and put down the landing gear. I'm going to go ahead and put the landing gear lever down. I don't feel any drag in the... I'm still getting beeped at here. What happened? Oh, they decided not to go down. All right, so when this happens, this is a little tricky because it requires a little bit of finger strength and arm strength in your part to extend. But the good news is the mechanical system is actually apparently very, very reliable. So the first thing we need to do is we need to get our airspeed less than 132. I'm doing about 90 right now, so that's perfectly fine. Now what we're going to do is we're going to go over here, and there's a circuit breaker for the landing gear. I'm going to go ahead and pull that out. By pulling that little circuit breaker out, I'm basically pulling the electrical system out of it in case there's something going to be holding it in place. Next, what you do is you're going to take the landing gear switch, and you're going to put it in the down position. Remember, there's no electrical power going to this system anymore. Next, what we're going to do is between the seats is this lovely manual gear system that will enable us to basically jack the gear down mechanically. It's a little red bar that you see on the floor. So the way this thing works is you're going to go ahead and pull it just a teeny tiny bit, about 1 to 2 inches out. And what it's going to do is it's going to engage a clutch that's basically going to mechanically connect that handle to the landing gear system itself. Once you've done that, what you're going to do is you're going to pull that handle all the way up, and then you're going to push it down. And basically what you're doing is you're cranking the landing gear down. When you look at it from the side, you'd be going crunch, 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 crunch. And it can take something between 12 and 20 pulls, depending on... Oh my gosh, the one on the right, come on, man. Ooh, this is a lot of exercise. Okay, not bad. I think we got everything back to normal here. So the good news is, after you've done that, you know you've done your hard work correctly, because the gear down indicator will now show. This is good too, because now we can look down, we can look at the little indicator, see the landing gear wheel got out of the way. The other nice thing about this too is you're going to feel that extra spike of drag that's going to indicate it. Now remember, after you've done all those pumps, you have to put that lever back to the normal position where you're going to just kind of flip it forward and stick it back down, and then if you want to, you can go ahead and reactivate the landing gear circuit breaker, which is going to be over here. Now one of the things they talk about in the book is the fact that once you have gone ahead and done that process, you cannot retract the landing gear electrically, even if you could retract the landing gear electrically. You basically are going to have to get yourself some nice maintenance in order to fix the damage that you just did. I do not recommend trying that out during flight. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of bring us around here and hopefully find the runway. Getting a little on the slow side. This poor aircraft just has so much abuse today. And then we'll go ahead and take a look at something else. All right, fortunately we got some good maintenance done and everything was all ready. The plane's got a good bill of health. Apparently they let somebody who didn't know how to fly it play with it, and bad things happened. So the last we're going to take a look at today is the interesting little thing with setting cruise power on this particular aircraft. So let's go take a quick look. So we're sitting here up at 7,500 feet. We're up plenty higher, heading towards New York City, way down that side of things. Pick it up speed, but obviously we're not going to be flying here at 25 and 27, and that doesn't make sense. So how do you set cruise power in this aircraft? It's actually very, very simple. What you do is, if I go ahead and pop up this little panel, I'll show you this one, the real one. You simply take these two digits, add them to these two digits, and depending on the sum of that, sets what your particular power level is. So if you're looking for 75% power, if these two numbers add up to be 50, that means you're at 75% power. If they add up to 47, that means you're at 65% power. If they add up to 44, that gives you 55% power. So let me show you what I mean. So let's go ahead and set up one combination here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set my manifold pressure to, let's call it about 25 inches here. Looks pretty good. Then I'm going to go ahead and set my RPM control down to 25 inches as well. Obviously, you're going to have to play with your manifold pressure just a tiny bit when you do this reduction. Looks about 25. Go give it a little tiny push. Perfect. So now that we're 25 plus 25 now means that the aircraft itself is at 50% cruise power. Now why this is so cool is, let's say for example that I want to go ahead and make my flight a little bit quieter. Let's say I pull my propeller control back just a tiny bit. Doing things a little out of order here, but that's all right. 2400 RPM. So now what we're going to do is we're going to set my manifold pressure up to 26. Looks like I'm not going to be able to get to 26 here. I'm going to get darn close to it, but that's okay. So I'll set this one to 2450 instead. So since 25.5 plus 24.5 is equal to 50, this is another version of 50% power. You can see already how useful this is. So let's go ahead and reduce my RPM a little tiny bit here to about 2400 RPM. That looks pretty good right there. So now let's say we want to do 65% power. So we need to add up to a total of 47. So let's see what this would be here. So we take 24, actually I should say 47 minus 24 would equal 23. So now what we're going to do is we're just going to take our manifold pressure and we're going to reduce it until we get down to about 23 inches or so. And that's 23. So 23 plus our 24 is going to give us 47, which is now equal to the total 47, which means we're now at 65% power. Now let's say we want to do a nice and quiet, relaxing cruise. I'm thinking like a 22 and a 22. So I'm going to go ahead and reduce my manifold pressure to about 22 inches. Looks about right. Well, it's got to settle in a second anyway. Then I'll go ahead and reduce my RPM also down to 2200 RPM. We get nice and quiet in here in a second. Oh, I think I'm at the bottom of my stops here. Yeah, I think I'm at the bottom of my stops. Ah, shucks. Right, let me go ahead and do a quick little adjustment here. This is a flight simurism. There it goes. I know I could fix it. Looks like we're going to be 23. Well, that's okay. So 23, 100 RPM is where we're going to get stuck at the bottom. And that would mean over on this side, we'd have to be at 21. Like I said, we're suffering a little bit from a flight simism here. So unfortunately, we're not able to show that quite as well as we could otherwise. Maybe if I go ahead and lean the mixture a tiny bit. Too much. Awesome. So hopefully in this video you saw a couple different things. You saw a bunch of different emergencies. Obviously the one you want to practice is that engine out because you saw how quickly things happened. There's one other situation that we didn't take a look at, and that's if you start to have engine roughness in flight. One of the things that I find kind of interesting about the engine roughness in flight is the first thing they want you to do before any of those things start kicking off is to make sure you're on the fullest fuel tank here. So let's go assume that my left fuel tank is the highest. Actually, I think my right, we'll call the left one the highest. The next thing they're going to ask you to do is go ahead and flip on the fuel pump. If things do not improve, shut the fuel pump back off. And the next thing they'd ask you to do is to go ahead and set the mixture to full rich. I could do that right now. We're actually going to get a reduction in power because of altitude. And then later on, they ask you to go ahead and take your magnetos here, and they ask you to set it to one specific of the magneto settings. So in this case, if I flip this, it's probably going to shut the thing off because it's a little twitchy. Left, we'd say, was there an improvement? Okay, there was no improvement. Let's try setting it to right. Let's try setting it off. I like that too. Nope, there was no improvement. In which case, they tell you to go back to the both setting, just like, whoa, like I said, it's a little tricky in this flight sim. Perfect. That would be the other option they give you. And obviously, if you have things like smoke and fire, you're going to be looking at things like shutting off the mixture completely, shutting off the fuel selector valve, shutting off the master switch, shutting off the magneto switches, and of course, we have ourselves a handy-dandy little fire extinguisher to help us out. So this concludes our series on the Mooney 20 here. It looks to be an absolutely excellent airplane. I look forward to being able to operate it myself in the real world. And I also, of course, would love to be able to go put together a video series where we can kind of see this Mooney versus what the actual Mooney is and see what its relation. Otherwise, enjoy.